Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. Welcome again to the Helali Show. I am so honored. It's such a big pleasure to have my brother, my good friend, my colleague, of course, Chay Bowes, RT journalist, geopolitical analyst, influencer, all of the above and more. He'll, I'm sure, go into details, but it's great to have you on the show, Chay. Thank you so much for coming out.
Great to talk to you, Chris. Always good.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. So there's a lot going on these days. Last I saw you in Moscow, the world was a bit more peaceful and a bit more rational. All bets are off now. So we've got over 1,000 people watching live now. Greetings to everyone. Tell us about how you feel. Just your opening statements about what you think is going on, your opinions, your perspectives, all of that that's happened in the past 10 days or so.
Yeah, well, I think it's a case of we did think it was coming, but you always kind of hope that common sense will prevail. You hope that the powers that be, even if you got this very bellicose sort of theatrical Donald Trump, right, at the helm, you always hope that there's wise sort of voices in the background, that there's good counsel there, that the Americans realize that these, perpetual interventions don't really work. I mean, I've been posting for, a couple of months now, really, that, Iran isn't Venezuela. I mean, it's geographically not Venezuela. It's historically not Venezuela. It's culturally, militarily, it's like regional power-wise. It's just not Venezuela. But I think in some ways, I feel like the Americans, it's like a gambler in a casino. They've had a couple of what they perceive as easy wins in Venezuela. And, maybe, with this, I'm going to solve 8 wars thing, which is, it's kind of diluted in some ways, this idea that he solved 8 wars. But this peace president stuff, I think I get a sense that seeing what's happening now and the very serious voices I listen to coming out of Iran, serious sort of objective observers, which I would consider myself to be one in at least some small part, and yourself and our colleagues and friends. I find it really hard to believe that the Americans are believing their own propaganda around this. We are the greatest navy, all these kind of, America, the bald eagle, all this sort of messaging, all the sort of theatrical Hollywood style PR bump on it, it's almost very juvenile. And I think there's a sense that people like Pete Hegseth, who, I was just yesterday talking about, was against this type of war. Rubio previously said he was against this type of war. We all know that the vice president of the US definitely said he was against this type of war. They're all now on board with this thing. And I think that because they do a bit of shock and awe, or double what shock and awe was in Iraq, that means they're going to, destroy the Iranian Navy. I mean, whenever the Iranians left inside of American satellites and American observer drones, and, you'd imagine they knew it was going to be hit. I mean, there's nowhere to hide these ships in the Iranian Navy. So I would imagine the Iranians, who built a military and a sort of a defensive arsenal of weaponry and thousands of kilometers of defenses along their border, on their coast, have a very disciplined and very well trained and very sort of ideologically motivated military. I would imagine that they are very well prepared for what has happened. I'd imagine that they have a plan. I'd imagine that, as we've heard the Iranian foreign minister say, we're waiting for them to come and we're ready for them. I mean, to discount all of that as some sort of Iraqi style, awkward propaganda from the Iranian side. They don't seem very disposed to awkward propaganda. I mean, to me, it seems that they're quite serious people. And you have to ask yourself, are the people in charge of the Department of War serious people? I mean, you've got several Americans dead now, we know, and these are real people who won't go back to real families in the United States of America. This all began in the midst of a negotiation, which we were told was going well. Why strike your supposed adversary in the middle of negotiations that are meant to be going very well? It seems to me that negotiations were disrupted or somebody wanted them disrupted because maybe there could have been a peaceful resolution here. And who doesn't want a peaceful resolution? You have to ask yourself. That's looking for the bigger. So that's my sense is one of real concern that because the Americans, or at least the people in charge of the Pentagon and the Department of War and the White House right now, actually have believed their own propaganda on Venezuela, and they think they're going to get an easy cakewalk in Iran. I'm very concerned about that. And because of my concern about that, I feel that they probably could escalate to a ground-based invasion or intervention, which would, without doubt, in my view, be a catastrophe for the US. Now, just one more thing. I heard Pete Hegseth consistently saying, we've got complete air superiority. Well, newsflash, Mr. Hegseth, you had complete air superiority in Vietnam. You had complete air superiority, really, in Korea. Well, you had a lot of Chinese and Soviet pilots fighting with the Koreans, but you did have air superiority. You had it in Afghanistan. You had it in Iraq. And we all know how those wars ended. You didn't win any of those wars. And again, Iran is not Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, or Iraq. It's far more potent, far more ideologically motivated country, culture. And it's not about whether you agree with the Islamic Republic of Iraq or not. I don't care if you agree with them. Let's talk about the reality of what you've taken on now. And the fact that on day 10, the Iranians are still destroying American infrastructure in the Gulf. They're still impacting hugely the very vulnerable economic equilibrium globally right now when it comes to energy. And they seem to have a plan. And I'm concerned that what we're told is the most powerful military in the world, I'm kind of concerned that they don't seem to have a plan beyond a couple of weeks worth. No military can impose itself on a country like Iran with standoff strikes. Number one, you're going to run out of missiles. Number two, you just can't get onto the ground. And it seems that this sort of supposed people's this wave of people who despise the Islamic government in Iran are going to bubble out onto the streets. I mean, to me, it seems you bomb schools full of kids, you hit civilian targets, you burn a country's infrastructure. It's going to be a rally around the flag effect. I mean, it happens all the time. And any sort of military strategy, anyone who studied military strategy, which I've done a little bit of, these are the pitfalls you're meant to avoid, right? It just seems to me very amateurish. And that worries me because the potential for this to escalate from the American side. We've got the 82nd Airborne getting ready for a deployment. There's lots of signs and signals, from OSINT intelligence that the Americans could, in real terms, consider an on-the-ground conflict against the Iranian army and its allies and proxies. I mean, the Houthis haven't even got started yet. They haven't got their boots on. And we know that the Houthis couldn't be defeated by the United States of America with their air power and their aircraft carriers and their strike groups. You got to really ask yourself, is there a plan? And for me right now, the most worrying thing is I don't think there's a real cohesive, well thought out plan from the US side.
I think you're absolutely right. Actually, last night on the stream, I went through with everybody we had about 6,000 people watching live, and I went through and talked to everybody, and we went through a foreign affairs article. It's a mouthpiece of the foreign policy establishment in the US, but it was breaking down the Powell doctrine before. So Colin Powell, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and later Secretary of State in the US, he laid out 8 fundamental questions, give or take, that needed to be answered before pursuing military objectives. And basically all 8 of those have been thrown out. And the Trump administration has now relied, according to the author, on tactics of surprise and basically the vagueness, the unknowability of what is to come. And so that is the advantage that they've had, for example, in Venezuela. But as you're rightfully pointing out, in a country like Iran that can withstand weeks and weeks of that vagueness and still remain standing and firm, then comes the question, well, what's the objective now? Because then you start to erode popular support. So there already was not a case built up for the Iran war. So one of the Powell doctrines was you need to make a case to the American people and there needs to be overwhelming support. Like, for example, Persian Gulf 1, the Iraq War and Afghan War, which had popular support given the attacks on 9/11. It was a rally around the flag effect in the reverse and the jingoism and everything like that. There's been nothing like that in this
No,
buildup. Nothing. And in
no,
fact, quite the opposite. You and I well know there's been tremendous criticism from people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the former representative, Thomas Massey, some very vocal and prominent social media influencers from across the gamut. And that has a real impact on people and their perspectives, right? And so
yeah, I mean, yeah, and you've seen, with this strike on the school, which I don't think the Americans targeted a girls' school, but their actions led to the deaths of all these kids in a school. If you want to maintain the narrative and you want to control that, you need to come forward and say it was a mistake. We apologize. We're investigating it. At least that. But for Donald Trump to come out and say we didn't do it, the Iranians bombed their own school, it stinks of British anti-Irish propaganda back in the 70s and 80s. Anything bad happened, the Irish did it to themselves. They starved themselves, they bombed themselves, they tortured themselves. Like the old joke in the Irish pub about the Irish Catholic guy found behind a police station in a British army base in the north of Ireland. He had 92 stab wounds. He'd been hung, shot 42 times, and had all his fingers cut off. And went to the coroner's court in the UK, he said it was the worst case of suicide he'd ever seen. So there's this ridiculous sense that you can deny anything you want, but it's obvious that what happened is the use of this AI has obviously, it's in some way it's morally sort of franchised this killing of these kids, which is really remarkable and horrific thing. And as soon as you have people outright denying that, you're losing the moral high ground, even among avid supporters of Donald Trump. Now, some of what he's doing domestically, he's done well in my view. Internationally, it just stinks to me. There's an interesting sort of meme and a sort of film of I think it's Wesley Clark, the general who's in charge of the second invasion of Iraq, as far as I recall, and I could be wrong, explaining how he was told, how he found out that they were going to invade, I think, 7 countries in 5 years, or 5 countries, 7 years. It's a remarkable piece of video. I suggest people have a look for it. Even on my own X, you can just search for Wesley Clark. And he just explains how he walked into the Pentagon one day and one of his subordinate generals pulled him aside and said, look, you do realize we're going to bomb Iraq? He said, well, why? And the general said, well, because we've got a big army and I've been told we have to bomb something. We got to get on with it and bomb that. He said, well, why have we found evidence? No, we found no evidence. We're going to invade. And he was astounded by this. And he said, it doesn't end there, sir. He said, we're going to invade Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan too. And it's all already planned. It's quite remarkable. And the problem is that the initial momentum is kind of addictive for the politicians like Lindsey Graham, like Mr. Trump, with his baseball cap, go America, I'm not going to say, the F yeah, go USA kind of stuff, which, it's high octane kind of stuff for the masses. But after the 10th day, the 11th day, the 12th day, when the bodies keep trickling in, when the Iranians are still launching these relatively cheap drones, remember, they have at least many, many thousands of these things. They can be launched from the back of a pickup truck. Iran is a geographical fortress, with the most impenetrable mountain ranges, bordered by countries who despise the United States of America as well. It's an impossible place to close down and shut off. It's like, it's remarkable naivety to think that one of those drones can hit a processing facility, an oil facility, a ship in the Straits of Hormuz, and that can cripple the whole global economic and energy infrastructure for it. So the Iranians right now only need to be, lucky once. The Americans need to be lucky every time. And in a culture also, just to go back to this idea of the American lack of knowledge and engagement with culture, I think this is something that we've seen in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, also in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. In every foreign war, the abject lack of an ability to understand the cultures that they were meant to be freeing the crap out of. First of all, this idea that, they don't even know we're trying to help them. I think there's a sense like that right now in Iran, that they're completely discounting that a significant body of the Iranian population support their government. That's almost unheard of. It's like when you live in Russia, you understand how the West tells you you're wrong. When you say most people here actually support President Putin, they like him. Even people who disagree with him on some things support him because they think he's a great leader for their country and he thinks he's done a good job and they believe the war was inevitable, so they have to go and fight it. We don't like the war, but we started, we have to finish, blah, blah. They will deny you that reality. And I think in the United States of America now, they're cultivating this idea that anybody is, who disagrees with us is against us. They're traitors. They're pro mullahs. They're pro the ayatollahs. All this stuff. It's very dangerous. And that coupled with the sort of geostrategic ignorance, which I've seen, and I'm just seeing, I'm astounded by, being able to produce like a 3-minute video of Iron Man, Donald Duck, and G.I. Joe, an AI video. It's fine. That's great, but that doesn't win wars. That doesn't take a house or building on the edge of a massive city. That is Fallujah. I know guys that fought at Fallujah in Iraq. I know guys who were there. And, on the American side, I got to tell you, I know the friends of mine, one of the guys serving in the army. And, the reality of what happens on the ground is very far removed from some kid on a computer, with Movie Maker and some politician, saying, yeah, we've beaten them. It's game over. Their Navy is crippled. Forget about the Navy. How are you going to clear, Republican Guard out of the mountains? How are you going to stop the Pakistani Taliban and everybody else getting involved in this shit show when you kick it off? That's the reality. And it's that lack of, if you and I here on the stream on X are seeing these things, and I think that what we're talking about is based in fact, if we see it, how come nobody in the Pentagon saw it and said, look, guys, this is not a good idea. Keep talking. Maybe some pinpoint strikes. You want to knock some stuff out? Yeah. And remember, the last thing I'll say is, all of this was meant to be academic. Donald Trump told us that the Iranian nuclear program was completely vaporized. He said it was completely vaporized. Game over. Job done. If that's the truth, and he was telling us the truth, why in God's name are Americans coming back from the Middle East in coffins?
That's a very good question, and of course, it bodes well in terms of our earlier conversation. To loop back to that, I want to talk about when you were saying about objectives and the fact that there are no clear objectives. The article was saying that Trump's doctrine is sort of based around flexibility. So we've seen him ebb and flow just today alone. So CBS news reporter tweets out, Trump is saying we're very close to the end. The price of oil goes from like 120, 115, all the way down into the 80s. And then now Trump gives a speech to the Republican, just an hour ago or so, gives a speech to the Republican congressional officials and says, well, actually, we're close, but not that close. And we have more objectives to do. And we're going to hit them hard. And I'm thinking to myself, this flexibility borderlines on complete lack of trust in the authorities, because 1 minute it's one thing, 1 minute it's the next. We have so many reels and clips of Rubio saying one thing to another, and then saying an opposite thing in the afternoon, and another one the next morning. And so many of these things, they're twisting themselves into pretzels with these kinds of statements. So without those clear objectives, this kind of flexibility and surprise and vagueness that allows for Trump to maneuver over time, it can't last. There won't be anything to really have the American people be convinced that this is worth it, that the price of gas going up is worth it, that the price of import-export is worth it, that the cost of travel, because Dubai is closed effectively. There's Emirates, right? I got an email from Emirates saying that there are basically no flights available to Dubai. People are fleeing through Oman and other places. So this is crippling major hubs of transportation globally. Think about the hundreds of thousands of passengers affected daily. Yeah. Businessmen, politicians, families, ordinary civilians. So that cost over time, I can understand 1-2 weeks of this. Maybe there can be an argument, although for me, I wouldn't necessarily agree with it. But months of this, especially when you don't have, as you said, clear objectives to win on the ground, especially in a ground invasion.
And because of the ego involved, right?
Right.
When you've got a very sort of, let's say, internally wise person, okay? a politician, a statesman, somebody who, thinks before they speak and consults the runes, if you like. Somebody like Vladimir Putin, there's no way he's going to send a tweet out or a post from sitting on the toilet in the Kremlin, that, release the Iranian football team, female football team from Australia, give them political asylum because they didn't sing the national anthem. The Iranian football team never sing the national anthem.
Right.
So this is the concern. And again, I'll go back to my main concern, which is that because of the statement, right? This is over, they're finished, their navy is sunk. It seems to me that this is an environment where people are working towards the emperor, delivering him little nuggets that he can talk about. We have destroyed the navy, sire. They are now helpless. It is a matter of days before we finish them. Good man, that's great news. And he goes on Truth Social. He says, they're finished, they're done. I was going to talk to them, but now I'm not talking to them anymore because they're dead, they're doomed. And, next minute you're looking at these, highly evolved Iranian missiles depositing their submunitions over Israel, no air defense. You're watching, highly valuable American radars getting vaporized by these cheap Shahed type drones. And you're kind of going, this stuff doesn't add up. But again, the psychology of this worries me. The ability to say, look, we might have got this wrong. So we need to maneuver. We need to pivot and say, okay, we're going to end the operation in 2 weeks' time and begin negotiating towards that point where you say the strikes will end. We're not going to strike any more energy infrastructure because it's bad for the environment. It's bad for the economy, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z, and reverse out some way and then say, look, these are the things we want. And that would be the statesmanly like thing, the well thought out thing. But because this is an ego-driven project, as much as I like some things about Donald Trump, I'm concerned that because this is an ego-driven project, him as the executive power and him as somebody who's very prone to volatile reactions when he's told things he doesn't like, he doesn't want to hear. I remember, I think it was the Labour Secretary told him, gave him the unemployment numbers. He didn't like them, so he fired him, Who in the Oval Office is going to go up to Donald Trump and say, look, this is potentially a shit show, boss, okay? If you're in a position of leadership, I think it was Rockefeller said, always employ people smarter than you. It doesn't seem that everybody around Donald Trump is being cultivated in that space to give him really good advice. It seems to me that he's a very egotistical person, liable to taking grudges on. And it's that the energy of that needing to be right, needing to be the biggest boy in the room, the alpha male, may tragically lead to accelerating the conflict to get this win, to say we now control, it's because of Venezuela as well. It's because, in my view, the Venezuelan military never stood up to stand down. They're this meme about, their Russian air defense, it didn't work so well. So ridiculous. They weren't even taken out of the warehouses. They were destroyed. The Book M's were destroyed in their warehouses. I mean, they weren't even deployed. 5,000 shoulder-launched air defense missiles, Strela. One was fired. I mean, you can say, your super weapon disarmed everyone. Super weapon was hundreds of millions of dollars handed to senior Venezuelan generals who decided not to get out of bed that day and didn't issue an order to activate the air defense. That's how the Americans flew in there. And that's how now, the Secretary of Commerce of the United States is sucking out the oil and the gold out of Venezuela. That's how it works. I think that gave the Americans a false sense of security, particularly at the top of the pile, the executive commander. And this isn't Roosevelt. This isn't Eisenhower. This is Donald Trump. And because Donald Trump has been given these 5-day, 10-day, 15 days, he's a very frontal lobe kind of guy, it seems to me. He wants this win. And because of that, again, I'll go back to my main point. I think because of that, it's a very dangerous situation where he may say, well, we're going to go in. It's an amphibious invasion. We did it in Hiroshima. We did it in Nagasaki. We did it on, Iwo Jima. Everything is seen now, and I'm just really worried that because this quick victory, which they've already awarded themselves with, and you should be very careful when people start believing their own propaganda. Very, very careful. And that seems to be the motivation now. And because of that gap in realism and the lack of people, it seems to me, around him, advising him that this could be a significantly drawn out, costly operation economically and in human life, in American lives. The lack of people brave enough to risk their career to maybe tell him the truth, he may say, more. Let's send more attacks. Let's go in over the border. Let's build a coalition of the Arab states to invade, just like Iraq. We did it in Iraq, the coalition of the willing. Why can't we do it again? We need to get rid of these Iranians, so we're going to go into to Iran via whichever avenue they decide to. I just worry that naivety and that lack of good counsel might lead to a huge escalation in Iran. That would mean a massive, massive shock to the global energy and oil systems and politically in the region, because we've seen how vulnerable countries like Bahrain, Oman, UAE are. We've seen how vulnerable they are. The battlefield has completely changed. A single cheap drone can shut an airport for a day. That costs billions and billions of dollars. A single cheap drone, or the threat of one, can prevent a ship moving, a whole economy grinding to the halt. This is such an important node for the global economy. It doesn't seem anyone's thought this stuff out. It just seems remarkable to me.
I agree with you. The other big thing that has happened, of course, we had the assassination, and this was reported very much in the Russian media. And also, I read an article last night on stream from a Russian professor at the Higher School of Economics and the editor-in-chief of Russia and Global Affairs, who basically said, look, this has changed completely the international politics and relations between countries, because one country assassinated the leader of another country. It wasn't via proxy, it wasn't via some group, it wasn't in a civil war. It was a targeted assassination of a sitting head of state. So that is very dangerous. We know that the Ukrainians have targeted President Putin, right? The drone strike on his compound and things like that. But this was a targeted and successful assassination. Now we have the news that has come out, in the past 24 hours, that his son, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei's son, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, has become supreme leader. And in the process of becoming supreme leader, he's lost in the past week 10 days, his father, his mother, his wife, his son, his sister, his brother-in-law, I think a few other relatives as well. I mean, that in and of itself, and he's a veteran of the Iran-Iraq war. He's even more militant in terms of his patriotism and his loyalty to the revolution. And what do you think this does now to him?
Of course. So look, I mean, this again is the naivety. I mean, if you're looking to sort of win hearts and minds, I mean, again, this is basic stuff. I mean, it's kind of reminds me of in Russia when at the early stages of this phase of the conflict, when the Russian army crossed the border in 2022, and of course the war started in 2014, they've been bubbling along there. But in February 22, the Russian army proper crossed the border into Ukraine. I would have said that, there was probably 30% of people in Russia were against the war. As time went on, and the Ukraine started to bomb places like Belgorod and Kursk, places I've been, places you've been, Chris, and see what they did in Belgorod city center on New Year's Eve, bombing, killing children, this brutality, and particularly the invasion of Kursk. You saw these very hard-line sort of oppositionists in Russia, number one, losing all their support, but also number two, even saying, well, look, we have to get behind the army now and get this finished. They started to realize that. This was a huge mistake by Zelensky, not only in a military sense, it was never going to win, but by the people who back him in London particularly. It was a catastrophe. They lost tens of thousands of men and most of their Western equipment. But aside from that, it changed hearts and minds in Russia. People said, we're fighting in Russia now. This is our country. And nobody's going to come here. So I saw a huge change in that. And I've been in Russia more than 4 years now. This whole period, I came to Russia first in 2012. So I've seen in snippets the country changing. But that was a really sort of pivotal moment where Russians kind of got behind their country, their flag. And sure, you can even look back to when the Nazis invaded Russia in the Great Patriotic War and the Second World War. Stalin was masterful in sort of saying, this isn't about communism. This is about Mother Russia. This is about the great country, the motherland. You must defend it. And people kind of got behind this idea. And it was because of that aggressive attack. I'd suggest that in Iran, America has lost a lot of its credibility particularly with this horrific attack on the girls' school, which everybody in Iran knows who did it. Despite the fact that the BBC will say, "Oh, there was a missile fired beside the school." Come on, please. We know how dubious Western reporting is about these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a mess. Again, that is not going to sort of get the US to go down the gears now and slow this down and say, "Well, hold on, we're in trouble." It potentially will make them go higher up the gears, listening to their own sort of bluster about this thing. We can't be beaten. We're the greatest military on earth, and when we're tied in with the Israelis, we're the super duper greatest military on earth. It can't be true. We can't be getting sort of held to account in Iran. It's impossible. These are just Iranians. Same country, beaten in Vietnam, of course. Remember that, and beaten in Afghanistan. Very, very sort of embarrassingly beaten. It was unedifying what happened to the greatest military on earth in Afghanistan. People clinging to the wheels of planes, dropping to their deaths as they fled, literally in days. Same in Vietnam. And the same modus operandi occurred in both those places. First, it was political influence. And we saw just prior to this military intervention in Iran, huge disquiet and violence on the streets. Nobody should believe for a moment that the CIA and Mossad weren't involved in propagating that. They've admitted as such. Soon after that fails, the military intervention begins, hoping to reignite the civil disobedience. Same things happened in South Vietnam, appointing a dictator. Same in Ukraine, depose the elected leader because he was more Russian disposed. Put in somebody who's nationalistic. We don't care about that. Get into bed with anybody once our goals geostrategically are met. It never worked. It's never worked. Nobody can give me a single sort of example where this playbook has actually worked to make things better. And funnily enough, it's Pete Hegseth and JD Vance both said that. I posted a video of Hegseth saying this. He said that we've lost all trust in our military and political leadership. The idea that we will go around the world doing regime change, it always makes things worse. He said that back in 2017. Mm-hmm. Now he's the golden boy with his Crusader tattoo and his baseball cap, telling everybody that we're going to wipe the floor with anybody. Don't mess with us. That's like going into your kids, 11-year-old kids' playground and beating the crap out of everybody. That's fine. You can tell yourself that you're the biggest guy there. But when you come up against a peer adversary like China, like Russia, in many respects, it's a different game. And Iran isn't Venezuela. It isn't. And remember, who actually defeated the great American army, which was probably a bigger army then than it is today, in Vietnam and in Afghanistan. This is remarkable lack of, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, but nothing seemingly has been learned in the Pentagon or in the White House. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
You're absolutely right. Another thing that I wanted to address, because clearly there's been nothing learned. You brought up Ukraine now. Let's think about Russia's relationship with Iran. Russia and Iran have deep relations. Sadly, some of our friends have said, "Where's Russia?" They start doing this sort of, paranoia. Where's Russia? Why isn't Russia militarily intervening? First and foremost, we both can attest, Russia and Iran do not have a military alliance. They don't have a defense clause. There is no agreement that has been signed and ratified by the two countries that says if one country is attacked, the other country will militarily intervene. So that's important to note here, because people are, oh my God, multipolar world, BRICS, this, that. Why isn't Russia, what do you want Russia to do? What do you want Russia to do? Iran itself told Russia that they weren't interested at that level of cooperation. The Russians, from what we know, have asked Iran if they wanted that. They were prepared to sign something like that. It also would have probably committed Iranian troops to helping in the Kursk, Kursk Oblast, just like the DPRK. But the Iranians decided not to do that, and they said that we will fight it alone. So first and foremost, people should just calm down. It's not that Russia is not a friend or betraying Iran. It's simply that their relationship does not rise to the level of defensive alliance, right, in terms of military alliance. But they are strategic partners. Now, Iran has elected the new supreme leader, and President Putin has issued his congratulations and spoken, and I quoted on X, he quoted in his text, congratulations to our Iranian friends. To the new Iranian leader, he needs a lot of courage and bravery to deal with what's going on. and that they are willing, they're happy to deepen cooperation and to continue on that path. So President Putin is very clear. Now, President Putin and Trump had a phone call today. And I'm sure you saw the news about that. There was a 1-hour phone call. We saw some reporting from Ushakov that he gave to the press here in Russia. And one of the things that he noted was Trump repeatedly said, when Putin was asking how, what do you want us to do? Like, what are you thinking in terms of that? When they were discussing the Iran situation, Trump said, and this is what was the quote in the press, we want you to finish up the Ukraine war. So clearly a complete disconnect from reality. That's not happening at this point, in my opinion. And you and I have been to the region, to the Donbass, to Kursk, to the Belgorod region. The special military operation is continuing because the root causes haven't been addressed. There's still, everyone's beating around the bush. The Russians have been very clear since the start. If you meet this criteria, hostilities will end.
Yeah.
If you don't, we will achieve our aims by the military means if necessary.
Yeah. I think that's given birth to this delusion, how's your 3-day war going, Mr. Putin? The Russians never said this would take 3 days, but the Americans have said this would take 15.
Correct.
So let's see who's at it longer and who comes out. See, the difference between these sort of Pentagon TikTok sort of reality of, the Pete Hegseth, in an AI fighter jet dropping shit on the Venezuelans, all this type of stuff, right? And the Russians understand war. They fought a lot of wars on their own territory. If there's a single people on earth that know war, the sacrifices of war, it's the Russians. And they never said that this would take 3 days. The only person that ever said that the operation in the Ukraine would take 3 days was General Mark Milley. He said the Russians will take over in 3 days. The Russians never said that. It's much like this Battle of Kiev, where we're told the Russians were driven back from Kiev. Of course, we know the Russians withdrew from Kiev as part of a tenuous peace deal, which was signed. And we know that because David Arahami, the head of the Servant of the People faction of the dictator Zelensky's so-called political party, he told us. Yeah. We know because Victoria Nuland told us that Boris Johnson turned up and said, you're not giving up, you got to keep this going. Because in the West, we need a Star Wars narrative. We need someone to call the bad guy.
Correct.
Because we are so grossly politically inept in our own countries. We've allowed our societies to turn to shit. And we've also allowed, terrible economic failure, massive sort of incompetence to rule our own countries. Look at the European Union. Look at the people in charge of it. We have to have this Star Wars narrative. I stand with Ukraine for 10,000 years. This is Star Wars. We're going to have like 5 or 6 episodes. Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back. I even saw Anne Applebaum, the Polish foreign minister, Radek Sikorski's wife, this exquisitely sort of hollowed out individual, who writes for the Democrats and the US deep state, suggesting, the Ukrainians have taken back 34 square kilometers of territory along the front line. The Russians, took 25% of Ukraine. This is just insane. This is the level of delusion that you're seeing. The difference between the Russians is the Russians, from being in Russia, and I've learned from many years in Russia, the Russians tend to say things they mean. They don't talk for the sake of making noise. They think actions speak louder than words. They don't, they're generally, the default position of the Russians is skepticism. They're skeptical. They don't award themselves great victories like it seems the boys at the Pentagon have done. It's a very, very dangerous place. But again, remember, Donald Trump told us he was going to solve the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He repeated that innumerable times.
Yep.
He told us that the war would never happen if he wasn't president, despite the fact that he was one of the first to send serious weapons into Ukraine. We've been told a lot of things, and talk is cheap, And again, as much as I respect some of the things he's done domestically in the US, I don't disagree with. It seems foreign policy is going to be the downfall of this man. And of course, you got to ask yourself, as you come towards a midterm election, a wartime president, it's a funky, sexy place to be when you're appealing to a base that is behind you whatever happens. You've got a significant portion of royalist, imperialist Persians in the United States. You appeal to all these different voting groups. You've got what was MAGA, which has now become a sort of a Trump sort of dedicated cadre. The real MAGA, the thinking MAGA people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson have peeled away and said, look, we just can't buy into this. We can give so much, but after a minute, if you're a thinking sort of MAGA person, this isn't MAGA, because you're directly saying we're going to go to war again. It's only going to take 10 days. No plan. And this is one of the fundamental things. And you know this as a military trained man. No plan survives contact with the enemy. It never does. It's impossible.
Correct.
Particularly not remember, these are the people of Xerxes. This is the Persians. These are not Arabs, which is something might be news to many of our audience. These are Persians. These are people, warlike people, many thousands of years of, artistic and cultural and scientific development. These are very intelligent, very proud people. And I think every time I hear the Americans say, you better surrender, I can feel them turning that, the offense of that, as much as we did in Ireland when we were told again and again that we were going to be wiped out by the British. We were finished. We were doomed. You'll do as you're told. You're this, you're that. That's all internalized and turned into a sort of a rage, a calculated rage. And I think the worst days of this conflict are yet to come for the United States of America. Very sadly, because I love the United States. I love Americans. I love you. You're my friend. I love so many of my friends are Americans. And I'm very disappointed in the early promise of the MAGA movement, which seemed to be so hopeful. We felt such hope that, there was an awakening. But we have it on tape. No more war, no more intervention, make America great. Let's, spend the money on our own people. Let's. As soon as the real politic of international sort of engagement came, straight back to type, straight back to type. No difference, absolutely no difference. And that's really disappointing and very worrying. And again, my core concern with President Trump is also what I like him for, this idea that he'll come out and say things. He's doing a lot of things overtly than most American presidents did covertly. He's telling the truth about a lot of things, about the American machine, the American empire. He's very truthful about that. And his doctrine is one of, look, we don't like it, we vaporize it, or we turn it to our side. It's the empire. This is the empire. And on the other side of that, something that which is refreshing in my view is the honesty of that, whether you agree or disagree with it, is the danger of an ego-driven project in everything, in a business, in a family, in a relationship. And remember, Donald Trump is the head of a family. He's the head of a big family. He's a very powerful man. And if his ego is allowed drive this necessity for a big win, particularly as Russia and China very quietly align in the background, quietly behind Iran, as the economic pressure builds on the United States of America. Every day that goes by, Iran wins and America loses. They're telling you that every day goes by, the Iranians have less launchers. They have less missiles. They have less ships in the Navy. The Iranian Navy was a coastal patrol force, essentially. It was never designed to take on a vast Navy like the United States of America. So please don't tell people who are remotely educated about naval warfare or this type of ridiculous stuff. This is fine for a woman pushing a shopping cart across the car park of a Costco. It's fine, but doesn't wash in the serious world. And the problem is that ego is hungry for this win, and how many lives are willing to be sacrificed to sate that appetite for this win? That's my biggest concern, Chris.
No, I agree with you. I want to ask you, speaking about that, I want to ask you, how do you think the Epstein files and the Epstein release have impacted the Trump administration and his legacy? Because as you know, I've been involved in the Epstein investigation. I've been involved with finding the second Black Book, publicizing it, also now working with the Congress on these issues. So I want to ask you, what's this legacy? And we still don't have all the full files yet. What's this legacy? We have people like Thomas Massie and many others. Marjorie Taylor Greene actually left office because of this. What's the legacy of this Epstein files? And people have called it's called Operation Epic Fury, and people like myself call it Operation Epstein's Fury, because this comes in the midst of the Epstein file release. You can tell by the charts, interest has waned from the Epstein files. And really, why would Trump be dragged into this quagmire when it was Netanyahu going back and forth trying to pull him in? Do they have something on him? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the first thing is, if I was defending Trump, I'd say, well, why did he release this tantalizing tranche of 3 million files if he was in it? That will be the defense. The president released them because there's nothing there. But then he held back 3 million files. That's not a good look. I mean, come on. I mean, it's quite amateurish, right? Better to just release nothing than release half. It's like saying, oh yeah, where were you last night? Oh, well, I was between. You were meant to be home at 10 o'clock for your dinner. Yeah, well, between 8 and 10, I was at Joe's house. Check it out, Joe. Where was I? He was at my place. Okay, but you didn't come home till 4 a.m. Where were you between 10 and 4 a.m.? I can't tell you that. I mean, what wife would you not be wearing the frying pan for that type of? I mean, for me, it just whoever thought out this idea that will release half with very little about me in it, despite the fact that there's so many photographs of me with this man, etc. And again, we're dealing with an ego. We're dealing with this very egocentric person. I just wonder and I worry, and I can't discount being objective and trying to look at it. Nobody, I think, can discount the fact that the way these two things have correlated with each other in a timeline. I don't think anyone can suggest that there's not some correlation, Chris. I don't believe there is. I don't know what's in the files. I don't know what Donald Trump did or didn't do, because anyone who says they do is probably making it up. We probably will never know. But are the two things? Of course, because wars in the modern time, wars used to be fought. If you study the war, wars used to be fought for survival, dominance, resources, and religious glory. That's what they were fought for. This war has not been fought for any of that.
Right.
Think about that. So what is it being fought for? Why is it being fought? You're engaged in a negotiation with a country which is at the very epicenter of global energy stability. Now, one thing some people say, which isn't often seen, which is hidden in plain sight, is the fact that today in Europe, LNG, liquefied natural gas, is 6 times more expensive than it is in the United States of America. Post the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, who is the biggest supplier of LNG to Europe? Yeah, it's the United States of America. So this idea of in the post-war period, keep the Russians out, keep the Germans down, and keep the Americans in. This was the doctrine, many say, around the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan wasn't like, oh, we're going to help Europe, we're going to give you everything you need, and we're going to, rescue Europe, save Europe, and keep the communists out. It was also about economic domination and making sure that the previous great power in Europe, Germany, was kept as a vassal state. And they've continued that through ensuring that these vassal-type politicians have led Europe, other than maybe Gerd Schroeder and, Helmut Kohl, potentially. But in the post-Cold War period, these very banal, useless corporate sort of management-type people have been in charge of Germany. That's not an accident. So, in my view, you got to always be skeptical. Follow the money. Look at the whole chessboard and see who's actually making money. Because remember, America owns the dollar, created the dollar, and either invades you with its massive army or bombs you from afar, or invades you and bombs you with debt or controls you through that dollar. And both those things are under threat right now. Both from China as the biggest manufacturing economy on earth, the biggest military on earth in some ways, Russia by deviating from this international rules-based order, which they've admitted was a complete lie. Mark Carney, the Canadian, sort of said, yeah, it was all a lie. We all pretended about it because it suited us. Russia deviated from that across the border into Ukraine. It saw an existential threat. Now we've seen how the United States is behaving. Isn't it remarkable that Russia isn't being, that they're not, absolutely publishing front page or full page articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post saying, look, Russia, we're sorry, we were full of shit. Look what we've just done in Venezuela. Look what we're doing in Iran. Might is right. We do what we want. You didn't do what you want. You didn't turn the great cities of Ukraine into Gaza. But you were called war criminals. We manufactured $1 billion industry and trying to convince the people of the West that you were their enemy, which is obviously untrue. So you got to ask yourself, what does the big picture look like? The big chessboard, this global chessboard. And the main motivator for that, of course, is money. So don't ever forget that. And consider what were great wars for before. my home city of Dublin was founded essentially by the Vikings, not because they loved war, but because they wanted to feed their families back in Scandinavia. So there were farmers in the summer and warriors in the winter because they had to go and do that. Is there any moral obligation really for this war? Was there a moral obligation in Vietnam? Possibly. Some people say we were fighting communism. Another worrying thing, we got to help the Ukrainians kill lots of Russians. The Ukrainians and the Russians are the same people. That's like saying we got to help people from Montana kill people from Virginia. It's an insane idea. But again, at the core of all of this rationale is ego and ignorance. And the two things combined, they're very explosive. They're very explosive things. And that's why the Western media cultivates this. When the most obvious transgression against humanity happens, it's the language that's deployed is like, oh, those several schoolgirls died in an incident in Iran. They weren't blown to pieces by Tomahawk missiles.
Mm-hmm.
But if it happened if the Ukrainians using an American missile shoot down a Russian drone and that drops on a kindergarten and 3 kids are killed, that's an act of genocide. So you got to always look at the motivation, who controls the media. Same people who control the weapons companies control the media. And this the old lesson, we've heard it all before, that if voting could change anything, they would have done it years ago. Look, whoever you vote for in America, it seems to be you're getting a war. That's it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I want to ask you as we slowly close out tonight, and it's been a phenomenal conversation with you as always. Everybody's loving you in the stream. I'm sure you're listening. You're looking at the comments. But one of the things I want to ask you is, where do you think this will end for Iran? How do you think this will end if you had a crystal ball? I know you don't. If we did, we'd be rich people, I think. But speaking of money, how do you think that this war on Iran is going to end? And how do you think the war in Ukraine is shaping up and will end?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when it comes to Iran, I'm hoping that the economic pressures, which is something that Donald Trump seems to be far more tuned into than the geostrategic reality of this thing. I'm hoping that oil prices continue to rise. I'm hoping that, and not because it will mean all of us pay more, but I'm hoping that the economic pressures will be felt by Donald Trump. He seems to be more acutely aware of those and the American economy, and that he will feel pressure from that. And in some way try to say, well, look, we've achieved some goals and then we're sort of winding down and we're going to start talking to the new leadership. But then again, why would the new leadership who were talking to the Americans and then were killed in the middle of the negotiations? Remember, the Israelis bombed them, I think, as well, in the middle of the negotiation. Why would anybody with a remote sense of self-preservation begin to engage now with the United States or Israel in any kind of negotiation? It's quite clear that they just want to kill anybody they disagree with. I mean, this is remarkable. Remember, we've been told that the great democratic powers are, saving us from evil people. It's not the Iranians that's wiping out the 3 tiers of the Israeli cabinet or 3 American presidents. I mean, so you got to just see it for what it is. Sometimes you got to like shake your head and do a handstand and look at things from the other angle. You got to remember, this is the great project of freedom and liberty, much like Ukraine. We've been told that we're defending Western people have been told you're defending freedom, liberty, and democracy in Ukraine. There hasn't been an election in Ukraine since 2019. Okay, absolutely insane. There's no liberty. There's no free press. There's no democracy. There's no freedom of expression. The language is banned. The religion is banned. So it's a complete anachronism to suggest that this is what it is. This is about trying to destabilize Russia. It's failed. The war is essentially over. And it's a matter of time in Ukraine before the Americans tell the Europeans, stop sending the money or we're going to cripple you economically. That's basically how I think it ends. Or Russia incrementally keeps moving forward to the point where Ukraine collapses internally and a new government is elected by the good people of Ukraine who are sick and tired of this war of corruption, theft, and profit. Okay, that's how it ends there. Hopefully in Iran, the Middle Eastern countries, of which Donald Trump seems to have some relationship as well, will start knocking on the door and saying, listen, friend, this is really bad for business. We can't get people on planes. We can't do our thing with energy. We're suffering. We're struggling. We need you to end this. Because the Iranians have no motivation to end it other than with some sort of internal victory. And what did that do for cementing this terrible regime that the Americans are telling us is in charge of Iran? If the Iranians come out of this on top, it's a vast win, not only for the Iranians, because the Americans are still telling you that they won in Afghanistan. There's people who say, well, Afghanistan was technically, we achieved our goals in Afghanistan. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. There's still people in some of the colleges in the United States, the military colleges, say, well, in Vietnam, and if you look at the actual parameters, well, we actually, what? This is the absolutely schizophrenic reality of some of these things, because they all feed into the same machine. So I'm hoping that on a fiscal pressure will end the war in Iran, because it doesn't seem that a objective, logical thinking process exists other than this financial one. And I think in Ukraine, I think the war is already over. And because living in Russia and understanding the society, it doesn't feature anymore. People have just completely absorbed it into the reality of day-to-day living. The war's going on. We have to win it. No deal's better than a bad deal. And the Russians have been absolutely consistent from day one.
Yeah.
The only problem the Russians have is not getting involved in a deal to placate the United States or Europe. I mean, Europe is utterly irrelevant, but President Putin has shown again and again, to Mr. Trump's frustration, I'm not going to do a deal to keep you happy, Don. This is going to be a deal that makes sure our grandkids and kids don't have to fight this war against these lunatics in Lvov and Kiev again. We're not doing it. We're finishing it, and we're finishing it on the basis that we don't have to do this again. We're going to get on with living our lives and our housekeeping on the other side of the country, which is another discussion maybe. But I think that's how it goes, Chris. And again, what do I know?
Well, we tried the best to unpack what we can see and what we can discern, but ultimately, history has a way of its own, and it has its own logic, and sometimes it defies logic. So I'm sure we're in for quite the next few weeks and months of tumult, and we will, of course, try to make sense of it for both of our audiences and for all the people out there who are confused about how we ended up in this predicament, and how the leaders who are supposed to be educated and some of the finest people in the West have brought us to the point of disaster, really. We'll see. And I think you're right about the economy and things like that. As the economic pressure begins to turn society in the West into a pressure cooker, I think that you will see a lot of people very angry that it came to this when it didn't have to, when there was no rationale or reason to do this at this point. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Chay. Shay's my brother, my colleague, and I'm so happy that we were able to do this. I look forward. Everyone's excited to have you here. Thank you for all the love for Chay. Please follow. If you're not following his channel, please follow his channel. Follow his show, Moscow Mules. Follow. He also has a show on X that he does. Follow everything. Keep in touch with him, and we're definitely going to have him back again soon. And also, I'd love to join him on his shows as well, and for us to continue this collaboration, because we want to continue to bring you the truth and a really deep analysis to a lot of the things that are impacting all of you and all of us these days. So thank you again, Chay, for everything. If you want to say any final closing words or where people can follow you, please go ahead.
Yeah, you can follow me on X, is where I do most of my stuff. It's at O'Shea, you can see it there. And I have a small YouTube channel, which I'm trying to build. So if you want to follow me there too. And we're doing the Chay Bowes show on X once, twice a week now. And the Moscow Mules. You want to have a laugh, you want to sort of, enjoy it. That's on a Sunday, and it goes out on our X feed as well. So join us.
Awesome. Definitely join. And we're going to try to build up his YouTube channel along with ours. And we're going to rise together as we continue to bring the truth in this fog of war and fog of misinformation and disinformation coming out of the West. So we try to bring you the truth. Thanks again to everybody. Lots of love. We'll see you again very soon. And look forward to hopefully seeing you tomorrow. We're going to have a special guest. I'll announce it tomorrow morning, and look forward to seeing you then. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. Stay safe.